my boots on and lace them up. A hard work, not another day to work. A hard work, that's what they say.
All right, so as the topic suggests, my talk is about something called cyber-physical systems. Just like honorable department chair of mine, I'd like this to be an interactive talk as much as possible. If you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. Has anybody heard of the term cyber-physical systems before? One, two. He hired me, so he better know what it is. So.
Is it similar to the Internet of Things?
Yes. People come up with, every community kind of in computer science comes up with its own term for things. So certain terms become more popular, others not so much. So Internet of Things has become a lot more popular. The community does similar things to what cyber-physical systems are. Anyway, so so what I'm going to talk about specifically is medical cyber-physical systems, which is kind of what I work on, medical devices of different types and flavors, and security for those. And so hence, when I started working in this field, I started getting worried and started hitting my thermometer as a starting point because it was getting crazy. All right, so to give you a background, computing history. In the 60s and 70s, we had what's called mainframe computing, right? You watch any Hollywood video, they're still stuck in those 60s and 70s terminology where Tom Cruise is hacking into something, he's talking about mainframes. Well, those things existed in the 60s, and there were these large computers, filled rooms, and at IBM was very big in that, and you could do some kind of data processing for you. In the 80s and 90s, Bill Gates came along and Apple came along, and you had desktop computing. Remember those old desktop? Well, everybody has a desktop machine here. Anyway, okay, so and you could do Excel and spreadsheets and PowerPoints and so on, mostly for business and some personal activities. And then laptops came along and kind of made things a little bit easier. Since 2000, there's been this huge effort going on in what's called ubiquitous computing, which is basically trying to put computing capabilities into everything around us. So it's computing that's ubiquitous, pervasive, and it can provide us with a lot of interesting services. The key feature, obviously, is that it is invisible. So you obviously don't want large pieces of computers around you except in a computer lab. You want to go around, live your life, and these computing facilities, computing elements can provide you with services which kind of enhance your life. For example, it can provide you information anywhere, anytime, and so on. So it is this trend that's led to the development of smartphones and iPads and wearable technologies like Fitbit and so on. So this is kind of where we are heading. This idea has been around since 1990s, but it's only now coming into its own. And things are very interesting. So we'll talk about, well, obviously we'll not talk about mainframe computers and desktop computing. We're going to talk about today's world. And a few things that's kind of happening is that we have a huge proliferation of data and devices. From tiny computers called sensors, which have a computing element and a communication capability, and a bunch of sensors which can measure, let's say, acceleration, temperature, humidity, and so on, being deployed in remote locations to monitor like pipelines or animals and stuff like that. You have ambient monitoring technologies. You have more and more smarter medical technologies. You have pacemakers which can now not only regulate your heart, but can also communicate that information to your doctor wirelessly, and everything happens kind of in a magical way. You have industrial control systems, robotic systems, which are automating manufacturing quite a bit, and obviously you need a lot of sensing for that, where to move the robot hand so that it picks up the thing appropriately and so on. And finally, you have portable smart devices, which I talked about in terms of Fitbit and smartphones and so on. So this is one of the first trends that's kind of becoming big as a consequence of ubiquitous computing. The second trend that we are observing, that's being observed, is that all these different systems are connected together. So there's an integration at scale happening. Initially, about 10 years ago, computer science networking research was big into what's called sensor networks, which was basically these tiny computers which could talk to one another, and then you could build these huge networks out of them, and you could do large-scale monitoring and so on. Now these sensor networks are being connected to the internet, and so you can remote monitor things. One of the examples is battlefield monitoring. For example, they were saying you could deploy these sensors in a battlefield somewhere, and then you can monitor enemy troop movements and stuff like that. So not surprisingly, a lot of these technologies come from the military. They fund the initial projects. And so from there, things kind of start branching out into other fields, into, for example, smart building management or health monitoring. So all these different systems are basically being integrated in scale, and you're getting these, super advanced or super aware environments which are monitoring us physically. So it's kind of taking what Craig was talking about, us being monitored on the web, to a whole new level of us being monitored while we live our lives in the physical environment. And the third thing is that as a consequence of the device proliferation, the data proliferation, and the integration of these systems together, the amount of data that's being generated is so much that human beings are not capable of keeping up with it. What's slowly happening is that as these systems provide us with different services, maybe control the temperature in the room, as a simple example or whatever, they're basically trying to increase, to be able to really utilize the systems, the amount of autonomy of these systems is increasing. So take human out of the loop. Why do you need human beings? They're slow at reacting at things. You want instantaneous things. Everybody wants instantaneous gratification. So why not let the machines do everything? And hence, there's this third trend of automating the control process of these large systems in such a way that humans are kind of slowly being pushed out. It's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen in 10 years. But our grandchildren probably will not have to worry about anything. Machines will take care of everything. So what was presented in Terminator is true. It's going to happen. So it's only a matter of time, and I'm playing a big role in making that happen anyway. So in terms of confluence of trends, you have the three trends we talked about, and this has resulted in this blah, blah, blah description of what I call cyber-physical systems. Basically, a distributed, environment-coupled, information distilling control systems. It's basically saying that your computation element or your computers are now going to interact with your physical environment and are going to be affected by the physical environment and are going to take inputs from the physical environment and going to change their own behaviors. So it's a very tight coupling between the computational element, which was now, what's now in just desktop computing or whatever, in your iPad or whatever, is now going to interact with your physical environment, and it's going to control it. That's the essential kind of definition or intuitive idea of what cyber-physical systems are and what they can accomplish a lot. It's a very powerful idea. So I'm not going to obviously formally define that term because nobody really knows what it is, but this is the kind of intuitive idea that we are kind of working with. To give you an example, cyber-physical systems exist already. This is not something that's going to come in the future. A typical high-end car has enough sensors in it and capabilities in it now that it could be considered a cyber-physical system. So I think Infiniti a couple of years ago, or even last year, was pitching an idea of your car being kept in your lane. So if you're drifting off your lane, it'll recognize that and bring you back. It does it automatically. It doesn't say, oh, beep, beep, go back into your lane. It just pushes you back. It's kind of the trend that I'm talking about, taking human out of the loop, making the decision for you in some sense. Did you know that a premium car has more software code in it than F-22 Raptor or the Boeing Dreamliner? And this is the number of sensors and the number of what's called ECUs or CPUs in a traditional desktop are much more and control a lot of different things. Like, for example, drive-by-wire. So now, when you turn your steering wheel, there is no physical object that's connected to your wheels that is turning your wheels. It's all electrical impulses, which then get sent to an actuator in your wheel, which then turns the wheel. But it just gives you an impression that things are happening as you turn your wheel. And this is happening in airplanes as well, by the way. Drive-by-wire is fly-by-wire, drive-by-wire is the term. So think about this. They have to give appropriate responses. They have to slow down the response of the car movement so that it feels like you're really controlling the car. So the car does a lot of things by itself, and the more, and a few more years from now, it's going to, Google already has a self-driving car. It's not surprising, really. Oops. I don't move forward. Okay. Another example is, of course, unmanned and aerial vehicles, drones. Facebook, not Facebook. What am I talking about? Amazon is trying to, or Jeff Bezos joked that he's going to deliver your whatever using a drone. Books, next haul of books for your librarians is going to fall from the sky. So, and drones have a lot of these capabilities, and 50% of the design cost goes in writing the software for these things, because you have to make sure it's correct. It's not going to fly into a tree or anything like that. It's not going to, start doing things that you don't want it to do, mainly because there is no human element involved, or the human element is kind of really far removed. So the third example of cyber-physical systems is healthcare and medicine, and I won't go into this too much because that's pretty much the entire talk. So, so cyber-physical systems. Anything physical goes in here. It's basically computational element applied to anything physical in the world, has applications in almost anything and everything you can think of. Robotics, transportation, energy, process control, infrastructure management like bridges or whatever, agriculture, and healthcare. And so healthcare is something that I'm going to talk about. So, so when cyber-physical systems are applied to kind of build medical systems which can monitor you or can actuate some kind of treatment or therapy or something like that, those are called medical cyber-physical systems. This category of applications or systems are being, nobody just thought that one day 10 years ago that, okay, we're going to build medical cyber-physical systems. It didn't happen like that. People have started working on different things, and the consequence or the trends led to the development of this field where now people want to look at this whole thing as something that needs to be investigated more systematically. So there was a lot of work going on in miniaturization, people who are building ingestible sensors, wearable devices, and so on. There was a lot of work going on interoperation. Basically, in a hospital, individual medical devices were basically standalone before, and it was the job of the caregiver or the clinician to kind of look at your pulse oximeter and then reduce your morphine. But people make mistakes, and so a lot of people croaked because of that, and so that wasn't necessarily a very, I hope I'm not in that stage one day. Anyway, so a lot of people died because of that, and so why not enable these devices to talk to one another and allow the software that's running in them to kind of do the control automatically. I'll give you some nasty examples at the end. Anyway, so and teleoperation, the advent of internet made it possible that care could now be provided remotely. There are lots of remote locations. Storrs campus, for example, seems extremely remote to me. So if you need a fancy, I don't know if there's a hospital here or not, but if a fancy hospital in Boston wants to look at a patient out here somewhere, then they could do telemonitoring and they can do robotic surgery from a distance and so on. So that was another piece of action that was going on. And finally, there was a lot of work going on in making these health monitoring systems or medical devices more autonomous in terms of providing closed loop control, which is basically sense data, analyze the data, and actuate. And then sense data, analyze the data, and actuate. That's called a closed loop control system. You have what's called artificial pancreas available now, where you have a continuous glucose monitor and an insulin pump, which is kind of plugged into you. And the glucose monitor monitors your glucose, and the insulin pump can inject insulin to keep you, if you're a type 1 diabetic, for example, keep you healthy. You don't have to worry about injecting yourself before meal and so on. So all these four trends have kind of led to what we call now medical cyber-physical systems, and we want to, as a group, analyze applications which kind of combine these different trends together into larger systems and so on. So roughly speaking, this is a dense slide, but the only thing that you really need to worry about or kind of understand is that if you talk about MCPS, you have monitoring devices. Maybe it's difficult for people on that side. And you have actuation devices, treatment devices, and in between you have decision support, which does the thinking for you. The caregiver is kind of in the corner. It's deliberate because most of the time they're just monitoring things, and they can provide some input, kind of parameters of control rather than actually doing control. And that's pretty much the general characteristics or general model that's used for medical cyber-physical systems. In terms of individual characteristics, you can imagine that these systems collect and store a lot of health information that's sensitive. They can actuate, specific therapies, for example, inject a medicine or something. They can nowadays communicate wirelessly, which is not necessarily a good sign. But it does provide some benefits that you can control them remotely. Many of these devices or these systems are connected to the internet, so they can be really controlled remotely from home, which is, from a security standpoint, not necessarily a good idea, or a dangerous idea, let me put it that way. And you have systems that are now more and more managed by the users on whom they're deployed. So think about it. Next generation of Fitbit would be a device. So for example, a device like Fitbit or something like that, a NIME or something, you're managing it yourself. It's not your doctor who's looking at it. So these devices are becoming more and more used by people who don't know anything about security, for example, or how these systems work, what's the data that's collected, how is it released, and stuff like that. So that's kind of an important characteristic that one has to worry about when designing such systems. And finally, of course, you have the closed loop control, and that's the insulin example that I gave you. So these are the characteristics of MCPS. And the current research is largely focusing on 4 things to kind of make them plug and play, which is like a USB key. You plug it into your computer, it works all the time, well, most of the time. So you want the same thing to happen with these devices. You just buy it from go to Walgreens, buy a monitoring device, plug it on yourself, and it starts immediately connecting to everything all the other devices you have, syncs with your smartphone, shows your whatever readings you want, and so on. So that's a big push towards standardizing the communication and making sure that you can have a plug-and-play experience with these medical devices. There's a ton of work going on in building smart alarm systems, which can collect data from a bunch of your physiological signals and kind of understand your state much more clearly, and therefore generate alarms in case something goes wrong. Instead of having like stupid threshold alarms, which just simply say, okay, if your heart rate went above 120, something's wrong, start beeping. But I could be running. So, it doesn't matter. People who are like, marathon runners or something, their resting heart rate's a lot lower than me, for example. So, you need an alarm system, which is very useful for such pervasive continuous monitoring environments, to be a little smarter. And so there's work going on that. As I talked about, safety is a big issue, and the coding aspect that I was talking about on how to model these systems so that the code that's generated is correct, is not going to kill you or something like that, is important. So there's a lot of work going on with that. And interoperability is another important research focus where devices are kind of being forced to talk to one another, especially when manufactured by different companies. So that's, so that silos don't get created and so on. So all that is great, except the one thing that is missing is nobody's talking about security. So this is not privacy like what Craig talked about. This is security. This is making sure that no unauthorized access happens on these systems that you control in the medical cyber-physical systems domain. So I thought I'd do something about it. And I'll talk, by the way, Bijan, how much time do I have? 15 minutes? Oh. Okay. Really? Okay. All right, so my piece of the pie, it's going to be 2 things. One, I work on wearable systems and security for that. And I'll give you an example of a security solution that I came up with. And I'll talk a little bit about networked medical devices for the future. So wearable systems. So think of this as the next generation of Fitbit, where you don't have one monolithic, bracelet which monitors a bunch of things, but a bunch of devices which can sense and actuate care for you, which is kind of woven into your clothes, or you're wearing it as jewelry, or whatever it is. And so it's like a network on your body. The advantage of such systems is obviously that it can allow continuous monitoring and better quality of care and can detect problems very quickly. Now, one of the things that I was working on was that these systems are these individual devices that form part of this wearable network, is that they are wireless. They're communicating over the wireless channel, right? They can't have wires hanging around your body. It's not going to work. You're going to trip all over. So why not have wireless communication? But if you have wireless communication and you don't care about protecting that wireless communication, then you're going to lose sensitive data. Anybody can eavesdrop. That's what happens with police radios, right? People have those tuners and they listen to police radio, police chatter. That's what's happening. It's eavesdropping. You can have people tampering with the data, pretending to be a device on the person's body, and then sending data to the system saying, okay, your blood pressure is really high, maybe give you a ACE inhibitor or something. And it can lead to wrong diagnosis and treatment, which is really, really bad. So the way to solve that problem is to establish a secure communication channel between any two nodes. I use the term nodes, any two devices on the wearable system. And the advantage of that is that what you do is that you establish what is called a cryptographic key. Has anybody heard of cryptographic keys? So for those who don't know, it's just think of it as a password. It's a password that only two entities who are trying to have a secure communication know. It's basically a very large number and a random number, very difficult to predict. Those are the two important properties. This key can then be used with an encryption algorithm to encrypt the data, so now you can understand it. And at the other end, you can transmit the data now in open, because nobody can if they don't have the key, they can't really understand what's going on. And at the other end, the data can be decrypted. So this key distribution, distributing the key itself, is a very big problem in wireless networks. It's like PhD thesis after PhD thesis have been written on just how to do this key distribution. It's a big deal because it kind of is the underpinning for everything. Secure communication can happen as long as there's a key. So tons of work has gone on to this, and I won't go into the details of this, but the one thing that I'll tell you is what I did. So one of the things that one can do in doing this key distribution is to manually type in the key at all these devices, and then secure communication can happen. Problem is, people can make mistakes. These keys are really, really long. And to give you an example, a good secure key is a random digit that has a value that's larger than the number of galaxies in the universe. So you can imagine how large that number is. So imagine typing that. It's not going to be feasible. It's not easy. Human beings make mistakes. So why not automate this key distribution process? And the way I did it was to use the human physiology itself. So basically the idea was that you have a sender. This is one device on the body. It measures a specific physiological signal and extracts some features from it, basically kind of the number of frequencies that exist in the signal and so on, and uses those features to hide the key that needs to be eventually established between the two entities. And then send it to the other side, and because you're measuring the same physiological signal on the other side, you can unhide the key. The beauty of this system, without going to the technical details, is that these two physiological signals need not be identical. As long as they're close enough in value, it will work. And that was necessary because the human body is designed in such a way that if you measure the same physiological signal at the exact same time in two different places, you're not going to get the same value. You're going to get similar values, but not the same value. So this allowed me to somehow do key distribution totally automatically. All you have to do is deploy the devices, and then everything's taken care of. You don't even have to know about it. And that's an important feature in terms of allowing lay people to use security. Yes?
Yeah, but does this take into account changing physiology? So for instance, I'm not a small person.
Right.
Let's say I go on a diet, in 5 years I'm down to quote unquote normal weight.
Right.
My physiology is going to change.
Yes.
Based on all that weight loss.
Yes.
Will this system take into account that physiological change?
Yes, because the physiological signal measurement has to happen synchronously at the same time. So if I'm doing key distribution today, both sensors are measuring the same your current physiology at this time. 10 years down the line, they'll measure your physiology at that time. It's not going to work that you measure this now, you measure this 5 years down the line. It's not going to work. It has to be measured at the same time. And that's one of the requirements to make this work. So it's not a biometric in that sense anyway. Yeah.
So there would be a sensor on a person
Two
who
sensors.
was the patron,
Yes.
the client,
Yes.
patient.
Yes.
The sender, why two sensors?
Because both have to be able to measure the physiological signal. Because both sides have to be able to measure the same physiological signal.
Oh, the encryptor and the decryptor.
Yes.
Bingo, thank you.
How were you able, you describe a little bit, and I know you can't go into really technical details,
Right.
how we were able to use, to hide it so it can't be cracked, but not require identical Fs, FS and FR. So
Okay.
it's obviously should be easier to crack than using encryption using a.
So it's called a fuzzy encryption. It's a different kind of encryption. The deal is, if you know, I don't know, I guess a little bit of math, right? You know polynomials? X plus 1, X plus 1. So, okay, so take a polynomial X plus 1, right? Or you can have 2x plus 1, 3x plus 1. So you can write it generally as ax plus b, right? So take your key, 128-bit key, or whatever, long key, split it up into as many, 2 parts in this case, populate half of that into A and the other half into B. So now you have key x plus the other half of the key, right? Now take these, this polynomial value and calculate the value of the polynomial for a bunch of features extracted from this physiological signal, which is basically kind of measuring what kind of frequencies exist within this physiological signal. So another kind of segue is that if you have any wave, right? Think of any wave, ocean wave, sine wave, any wave that looks like this, you can basically find out what different, so it's basically formed by combination of different waves, combination of sine waves, if you know. So a square wave is basically a combination of all possible sine waves that exist at all frequencies. So you can try to find what frequencies exist, what frequency sine waves exist that combine together to form this physiological signal with arbitrary shape, actually. And then take that as features. Use that to calculate the value of the polynomial I came up with. And you will get a bunch of points, right? You have a polynomial, you put the x value in there, you're going to get a y value. There's a board here, I can draw it. But anyway. and you're going to get a bunch of x, y points on a graph, right? Where you have a feature, you calculate the value of this polynomial. Now, add to this set of legitimate x, y points a bunch of nonsense points that don't lie on the polynomial. Mix it all up into this big gobbledygook and send it out. Anybody who's listening to this gobbledygook doesn't know which are the legitimate points and which are not. At the other side, you will have some legitimate points that you have measured on this side and extracted from this signal. And if you remember your basic geometry, if you know 2 points in a straight line, you can calculate the equation of the line. So if you have ax plus b, which is a single order polynomial, if you know 2 points on that polynomial, so if you have 2 features in common between this point and this point, you will be able to recreate the polynomial and extract the coefficients, this half, and you get the key on the other side. So I don't know how much of it you understood, but it's a relatively simple technique, and it's basically obfuscating things. So it's taking a bunch of legitimate points and adding to them so many illegitimate points or noise to the information that a bad guy cannot detect what is legitimate and what is not. And on the other side, the good guy, the other good guy, knows at least some legitimate points and so therefore be able to open. So,
Misinformation.
not necessarily. It's
Misdirection.
I would say obfuscation.
Which is to say that this system couldn't be hacked remotely. If you wanted to hack it, you'd have to introduce a sensor into
Yes.
the target's body
Yes.
in order to calculate those
Yes.
physiological signals.
Yes, which is very difficult to do. So some of the advantages of this system is that we tried this with electrocardiogram signals and plethysmogram signals, which are measured from your, remember the pulse ox. And the good thing was that the signals we used were universal, not something that's measured from people who have specific elements or something. The features that we got, the frequency features that I talked about, were unique enough for a person at that given time. So your features actually change over time. And the beauty of the system is that if you encrypt the data now, and if I as a bad guy have your old ECG signal, I still cannot decrypt it now because over time the signals change. So the features change. So that's the time variant property of this, which was kind of interesting. It was definitely quite difficult to brute force. Not as good as a genuinely random key, but it gets pretty close. And it's plug and play, which is kind of important. So the thing is that security is an overhead, and so you want to make sure that it's overhead in terms of, okay, computation and everything, but it's also an overhead in terms of the user trying to set it up, configure, and all that, which is a really painful process for people who don't know computing systems. So why not make the whole thing plug and play? It makes life easy. Yeah.
So I've read about some research on computing physiological signals from remote sensor information. For example, computing a subject's pulse rate from using like a Kinect or some sufficiently high resolution facial capture. Does that then, if that's the signal you're using, does that render the system vulnerable to a remote attack?
Yes, so that's why you don't use it. But you can. And if you do, you're going to get in trouble like that. So it is very, very difficult to come up with physiological signals. That's one of the big challenges here. To come up with physiological signals and then come up with features from those physiological signals which can be used. But provided you come up with that, we have a working system here. So don't tell me. You know, I should get more time than 3:30. Oh, there you go. You know what? I'm not going to talk about the next step and so on. It's maybe more interesting to move on. Okay, so that's kind of my work, and I've done a little bit of extension work on that, on wearable systems. The other aspect of my work that keeps me awake at night is networked medical devices, or security for medical devices which are networked. Okay, so let's look at that. Everybody knows medical devices. Everybody has used medical devices. Gone to a hospital, at home, monitor your blood pressure, whatever. Are used for life-critical applications. Devices are largely standalone and independent right now. But recent years have seen slowly, without anybody noticing actually, without lay people noticing at least, that there's been a ton of networking introduced into medical devices now. Almost anything from your portable patient monitor to your cow computer on wheels used in an ICU. Everything has some kind of a network port on it and has like an Ethernet connectivity or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or something. And these device manufacturers are slowly trying to, because of this increasing networking capability, are trying to combine these devices to do more useful things than what an individual standalone device would do. Now, as the networking is getting introduced into these medical devices, it has had a few consequences. The first one's on TV. I don't know if you can see anything. Can the light be lowered or something? I don't know. So this is from Showtime's Homeland. This is Nicholas Brody or Damian Lewis. I don't know if you know him. He's the bad guy. And he looks up the vice president's defibrillators number. Finds out what's the number for that. Then he sends that information to his ally, bad guy, who then says, fibrillation on. And you see that the vice president over there is clutching his heart, and Damian Lewis's character is telling him, "You're dying as I'm speaking to you," or something like that. Some badass line. And the person dies, or supposedly died anyway. I don't watch this show. So anyway, so there have been consequences to networking medical devices on TV, and you would think that Showtime's making that up, and it's not really. Totally incorrect. The way they do it is not necessarily very good, or very realistic, but the fact that it can be done does exist. So in 2008, I think a bunch of researchers from UMass and UW hacked into a pacemaker, and they could not only read the person's ECG and all that, they could induce shock whenever they wanted. And this is true. And they didn't even try to reconstruct something or try to find out what command to send or hack into something or the other. They talk about pacemaker hacking. It's not even hacking. what they did was that you have a pacemaker that's deployed inside your body. You have a remote control. Obviously, if you need to change the parameters of a pacemaker, you can't operate on the person, so you have a wireless remote control. So they, any communication that is happening between the remote control and the pacemaker was in the clear. So they just eavesdropped on that, and then just replayed that command again, just continuously doing it again and again and again and again. They didn't even know what was being sent, because many of these things are proprietary. You don't know what is going on, and they could induce the pacemaker to give you a shock. And so imagine what you can do if you reverse engineer the commands a little bit. So this really happened. And so after the pacemaker got hacked, people started hacking insulin pumps. And eventually it was found that hospitals across the country are rampant with malware, with viruses and worms and everything. Because most of these different devices, MRI machines and infusion pumps and so on, are connected to Windows machines usually for controlling. And so these viruses infect those Windows machines, not necessarily the device. And because these viruses or worms or malware are not necessarily designed to take medical devices out of commission, nothing really happens. But, it can happen. Well, what's preventing a bad guy from trying to do that? So these things have real consequences. Enabling networking in medical devices, though has benefits, has serious consequences. And the reaction to this particular news in the medical device community has largely been, we don't care. We have way too much to worry about. We are being sued left, right, and center because a cat sat on our machine and then it stopped working. And so all sorts of things, and this is true, this is really the case. It was a dialysis machine, I think, made by one of the Baxter, I think, and there was a cat in the person's house and it sat on the dialysis machine because it was warm, and that affected the dialysis process and the person was severely injured. So they have to worry about a lot of different things, and they say security is, well, at this point at least, is not on our radar because it's all academic, nobody cares. But before you know it, we will have to care. These things move really fast, and if we don't keep an eye on it at least, we're going to be in trouble. So to kind of give you a general idea on what can be attacked when you have medical devices in a care facility or at home which have networking capability is kind of 4 things. The first thing is obviously you can do physical harm to the patient, triggering a medication, an actuation of some sort, like the pacemaker hack, when it's not needed, and that can be a big issue. You can have the data that these devices are collecting be stolen. That's also a problem. You can have individual medical devices, shut off. So you make the device. So for example, you sometimes download an app on your phone which drains the battery. You can do the exact same thing with medical devices because, for example, infusion pumps now have the capability to download drug libraries, kind of what medicine is being pumped in, how much control we should have, and so on. All this is downloaded online. So what prevents you from pretending to be an infusion pump manufacturer, downloading a firmware update on these pumps, which just drain their batteries? Now, it's not harming the patient anyway, directly, but indirectly it is, because the infusion is going to stop after a while because the battery died. Yes? Okay. And finally, you have these devices being connected to the larger institution of the hospital, and so usually bad guys go to the weakest link, which in this case is the medical device, and then they can start prying inside the hospital's sensitive data about patients and so on. So you have to worry about patients, devices, data, and institution when it comes to medical device security. There are a bunch of challenges in this process. First, as I said, security is always an overhead. So one thing that people have to understand about securing systems is that it is an overhead. It adds more computation, it adds more communication requirements, it makes people think more, those people who are configuring those systems, and all of that is a problem. The heterogeneity of these medical systems manufactured by tons of different companies, they're not all following specific security standards, and so that heterogeneity is introducing more problems. Usability is another issue. You want to make whatever security solution you come up with, like like plug and play, like kind of the attempt that I did with my research work. Finally, I would say is that there's this huge attitude, which is kind of prevalent in almost any community, is what's called security through obscurity, which is basically saying my system manufactured by me, I know all the commands that need to, kill a patient or whatever, and these are all only known to me. Nobody else knows this. So why do I have to protect anything? Problem is, bad guys are clever people too. They're not idiots. And they're going to be able to reverse engineer a lot of the things. In the case of the pacemaker, you didn't even have to reverse engineer anything. So, and the other thing, they come up with a security solution which is proprietary, which is never revealed to anyone, assuming that that's going to work. But anybody can build a security system that they can break. The problem is somebody else is maybe able to break it quite easily. So security through obscurity doesn't work, and that attitude needs to change. So I'll finally end with one thing to kind of give you a little bit of a nightmarish scenario. So what happened was that now medical devices are, because of the networking capabilities, these devices are being put together to serve a larger purpose. For example, smart alarms. For example, making closed loop control happen in hospitals and so on. So one particular example where interoperability can be useful is this X-ray ventilator case, where in 2005, I think, this person came in for a gallbladder surgery, and they were lying on the bed, and they were supposed to get an X-ray done. So they were being ventilated at that time as well. So the anesthesiologist, you have to apparently turn the patient upside down, put the X-ray film underneath, take the X-ray, and then roll over the patient and so on. And so when the X-ray was being taken, the ventilator has to come out because the person has to be turned. And what happened was they took the X-ray, and then when they were taking the film out, the film got stuck. So everybody's pulling the film. The anesthesiologist is like, okay, why don't I go and help? And he or she, whoever it was, is pulling the film, and suddenly found that the person flatlined because there was this was a perfectly routine surgery. There was nothing happening. And suddenly the person died because they were out of oxygen, basically. Or they went into a vegetative state, and the person had to be eventually taken off life support or whatever. So it's a sad story. There's another one about endoscopy, about somebody getting a tracheotomy. They smoked a lot, basically drill a hole here. And so you have to have an oxygen tube going into your lungs, and you have to use an acetylene torch to drill a hole. So this person forgot to turn off the oxygen while they were using the acetylene torch, and it blew up. And so interoperability is kind of being pushed as a way to enable or to prevent these things from happening. Basically saying that if the devices know what is going on, they can start beeping a lot earlier than if human beings have to do it. So this is where the world is going, and we have to worry about security for these systems now, when a bunch of devices are talking to one another. It's not a safe world out there anyway. So, okay, that's pretty much my conclusion. Everything's becoming pervasive, devices are everywhere, safety is a concern, but security is also a concern. And you have to consider who the user of the system is. And anyway, that's that. The other thing, I didn't know what else to talk about in terms of publications. I think Craig already mentioned that there are a bunch of, that we are very conference heavy. We don't necessarily submit to journals. We only submit to journals when all our conference papers get rejected, like a paper gets rejected in every conference that exists on the planet, then we send it to a journal. And it gets accepted. So this CPS week is a conference collective. It's a collection of 5 conferences in this domain, which covers all possible areas of cyber-physical systems, not just medical systems. This is very big. It happens in April every year, 1 year in the US and 1 year abroad. The other one that I would say is CPSNA, which is another one, Cyber-Physical Systems, Networks, and Applications. This is another one of the big ones. In terms of journals, one that is dedicated to cyber-physical systems would be the Internet of Things journal. It's a brand new one. There are lots of old-fashioned networking journals and operating system journals and so on which publish cyber-physical systems work. But this one is kind of dedicated a little bit more to it. So I thought I'd mention that. Well, that's it.
We have 3 minutes for questions, which means about 3 questions.
That's assuming I give you one quick answer.
So So if security is such a big issue, and with all this internet of things, especially in terms of medical technology, can we use this interconnection that all these devices are now having to gather all that data in one place so that I, the patient, can actually see it? So one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is, why is there patient and medicine?
Right.
And why aren't we more like this?
It can be done, and a lot of the technologies allow you to do that, and it's kind of going in that way. All the personal monitoring systems are kind of going that way. But they still have to provide you with the software infrastructure to do the processing. It takes a specific kind of person to avail that service. Not everybody wants to do it. So, yeah.
I imagine that those who are working on technology like yourself must be working closely with actual care providers to determine whether all of this interesting creativity is actually aiding the patient, really improving the quality of care.
Yes and no, because it takes a lot of time to convince the caregivers that these technologies are essential. We are kind of, at least from a security in medical system standpoint, we are really ahead of the curve in trying to push an agenda, if you will, on worrying about security for these systems way before it really becomes a problem. Clinicians usually are very practical people. They have 18-hour days and they're busy caring for people. It is difficult to convince them of security issues. It's difficult. There's been some success in terms of if you're building an application of some sort which is directly affecting or giving them better data, better analytics or something like that. It's easy to convince them. But security is like, well, who's hacking us? Nobody is.
Well, I would think that security is not a tough sell once you're there, but the whole idea of doing these things, like you may have said this, I'm not sure if I caught it, but I do know it exists. The whole idea of implanting things in people, that's a huge thing.
Right.
Having to even work with patients to even want to do it or understand that you're doing it, to get permission to do it.
Right.
So I would think by the time we get there, everyone would be worried about security and you'll be in great shape.
Hopefully.
But I just wonder how that's being navigated now.
Not so much. Most of those systems are in the trial phase, so they're not readily available. So you have enough procedures in place, IRBs and so on, which get the permissions to deal with them for now. We'll see what happens in the future. It's difficult to predict. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, I know that cell phones and around the world will use either GSM or CDMA for transmission.
Right.
Okay, and so the wireless things that you're talking about, they use that, and which system is more secure?
So this is what I'm talking about is a very local communication between your device, whatever device you're wearing, and your phone. Once it goes to your phone, then your phone can use whatever CDMA or GSM to send the data out to the cloud, whatever that is. So, but that communication is happening over, say, a specific kind of link which can be protected, like HTTP link. Or for example, Google, if you go to Google, you have HTTPS or something like that, right? So that's a secure communication at the application level, which means it doesn't matter what happens underneath. What CDMA technology, if you're using Ethernet, Wi-Fi, none of that matters. The data will be protected. So it's a different problem, and that can be addressed a lot more relatively easily than what I'm talking about.
Okay, so I'm going to cut you off there.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Quick break this time. We have actually about 8 minutes.
Hi everyone, we're back. Our third and final CS session for today. I'd like to introduce Dan Doherty. He's a professor of computer science at WPI. His research and teaching focuses on the use of mathematical methods in designing and building systems, and on how formal tools based on logic can be used to help understand whether the systems we build, guided by specifications, fulfill our ideas about what it's supposed to do.